If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
I had a house, but not a home. A few months ago, something strange happened to me. It was not a dramatic event. Nobody got hurt. Nothing was broken. There was no big family crisis. In fact, if you had looked at my life from the outside, you probably would have thought everything was going well. I live in a quiet neighborhood in the United States. The streets are clean. Children ride bicycles in the afternoon. Families walk their dogs after dinner. On weekends, people mow their lawns, wash their cars, and wave politely to their neighbors. For many years, I thought this was exactly what happiness looked like. Every morning, I woke up at the same time. I made coffee. I checked my phone. I drove to work. I came home. I ate dinner with my family. Then I watched television or answered a few emails before going to bed. Nothing was wrong. Yet something felt missing. The strange part was that I could not explain it. Have you ever felt that way? Sometimes life does not fall apart all at once. Sometimes it becomes so predictable that you stop noticing how disconnected you feel. Researchers often talk about something called hedonic adaptation. It sounds complicated, but the idea is simple. Human beings get used to good things surprisingly fast. The new car becomes just a car. The dream job becomes a job. Even the house you once prayed for becomes part of the background. Your brain is designed to adapt. That adaptation can help you survive difficult situations. But it can also make you forget to appreciate beautiful ones. I did not realize this was happening to me. Not at first. One evening, I arrived home after work. It had been a long day. Traffic was terrible. My phone had been ringing non-stop. I felt mentally exhausted. When I opened the front door, I expected to feel relief. Instead, I felt something closer to emptiness. I remember standing in the hallway for a few seconds. The house was quiet. The lights were on. Everything looked normal. Yet a strange thought appeared in my mind. If this is home, why don't I feel at home? I immediately pushed the thought away. After all, I had responsibilities. Adults are good at ignoring uncomfortable questions. We answer emails. We pay bills. We clean the kitchen. We keep moving. Sometimes we move so fast that we never stop to ask whether we are moving in the right direction. Over the following weeks, I noticed little things. During dinner, everyone was present physically. But mentally? Not always. Someone checked messages. Someone watched short videos. Someone thought about tomorrow's schedule. Sometimes I was the worst example. I would nod during conversations while secretly thinking about work. I was sitting at the table. But I was not really there. One night, I looked around the room. My family was together. Yet I suddenly wondered how many moments we were actually sharing. That question stayed with me. The next day, I started paying attention. At work, I noticed people saying they were busy almost like it was a badge of honor. Busy. 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 Everyone seemed exhausted. Everyone seemed rushed. Everyone seemed connected digitally but disconnected emotionally. And the funny thing is that modern life makes this feel normal. You can instantly contact someone on the other side of the world. But sometimes you forget to talk to the person sitting next to you. That realization made me uncomfortable. Because I began seeing the same pattern in my own life. I had spent years trying to build a comfortable life. And somehow, during that process, I had stopped fully living it. One Saturday morning, I sat alone with a cup of coffee on the back porch. The weather was beautiful. Birds were singing. Children were laughing somewhere down the street. It should have been a perfect moment. Instead, my mind kept returning to the same question. What does home actually mean? Is it a building? A mortgage payment? A neighborhood? A zip code? Or is it something completely different? The more I thought about it, the more confused I became. Because deep down, I knew something important. The best memories of my life were never about places. They were about people. They were about conversations. They were about laughter. They were about feeling understood. Suddenly, a possibility entered my mind. Maybe home is not where you live. Maybe home is where you feel seen. That idea sounded simple. Yet it changed everything. Over the next few days, I became almost obsessed with observing ordinary moments. I watched families at parks. I listened to conversations in coffee shops. I noticed elderly couples walking hand in hand. I paid attention to small acts of kindness. And little by little, I started realizing something surprising. Many people were searching for the same thing. Not a bigger house. Not a better car. Not another promotion. They were searching for connection. For belonging. For meaning. For home. But the most unexpected discovery was still waiting for me. It would arrive during an ordinary family dinner. A simple question would be asked. A question so innocent that nobody expected it to change anything. Yet that question would force me to confront a truth I had been avoiding for years. And once I heard it, I could never look at my life the same way again. That moment is coming next. And honestly, I wasn't prepared for what happened afterward. The question that stopped me. A strange thing happened after my child asked that simple question at dinner. The question itself lasted only a few seconds. Everyone moved on. The plates were cleared. The kitchen was cleaned. Life continued exactly as before. Yet something inside me refused to move on. It was as if a small crack had appeared in a wall I had spent years building. From the outside, nothing looked different. But inside, I knew something had changed. During the following days, that question followed me everywhere. While driving to work, I thought about it. While waiting in line at a grocery store, I thought about it. Even while watching television late at night, the question quietly returned. Where do you feel most at home? At first, I assumed I was overthinking something simple. After all, many people would answer immediately. Home is where you live. End of story. Yet the more I tried to accept that answer, the less convincing it became. One afternoon, I was sitting in my car outside a shopping center. Families walked by carrying bags. Children ran ahead of their parents. Couples pushed shopping carts through the parking lot. Everything looked normal. Then I noticed something interesting. Almost nobody was looking at each other. Most people were looking at their phones. A husband and wife sat on a bench together, each staring at separate screens. A teenager walked beside her mother while scrolling through videos. A man crossed the parking lot talking through wireless earbuds while his young son followed several steps behind. Suddenly, I wondered whether modern life had created a strange illusion. We are surrounded by people almost all the time, yet many of us feel increasingly alone. The numbers seem to support this idea. Researchers have repeatedly found that loneliness has become one of the most common emotional experiences in modern society. Ironically, this has happened during an era when communication technology has never been more advanced. We can send messages instantly. We can video call people across continents. We can share photos with hundreds of friends in seconds. Yet emotional connection often feels harder than ever. That realization stayed with me. Because if belonging is one of the deepest human needs, why do so many people secretly struggle to find it? A few nights later, I found myself awake long after everyone else had gone to sleep. The house was completely quiet. I walked through the hallway and noticed family photos hanging on the wall. Vacation pictures. Birthday celebrations. School events. Smiling faces frozen in time. Looking at those photographs should have filled me with certainty. Instead, they filled me with curiosity. I began asking myself questions I had avoided for years. When was the last time I had a truly meaningful conversation with someone without checking my phone? When was the last time I sat with my family without feeling distracted by tomorrow's responsibilities? When was the last time I was fully present? The answers were uncomfortable. Not because I was a bad husband or father. Not because I did not care. Quite the opposite. I cared deeply. That was exactly why these questions mattered. Modern life often tricks us into believing that love is proven through effort alone. Work hard. Pay the bills. Solve problems. Stay responsible. Those things matter. Of course they do. But there is another truth that often gets ignored. People do not only need our effort. They need our attention. Attention is one of the purest forms of love. And attention has become increasingly rare. The following weekend brought another moment I did not expect. My family and I visited a local community event. There were food trucks, live music, children playing games, and neighbors talking with one another. It was one of those simple American weekends that seem ordinary until you really pay attention. As I watched people interacting, I noticed something fascinating. The happiest people were not necessarily the wealthiest. They were not necessarily the most successful. They were often the people who seemed genuinely connected to those around them. They laughed easily. They listened carefully. They made eye contact. They seemed present. That word kept appearing in my mind. Present. Not productive. Not efficient. Not impressive. Present. Later that day, while driving home, I looked out the window and realized how much of life passes by unnoticed when we are constantly rushing toward the next task. In America, busyness is often celebrated. People proudly describe how packed their schedules are. They wear exhaustion almost like a medal of honor. I had done the same thing for years. Yet I was beginning to suspect that being busy and being fulfilled were not the same thing. In fact, they might sometimes be opposites. The thought felt unsettling. Because if that was true, then perhaps I had been measuring success incorrectly. Then came the moment that pushed everything further. A few evenings later, my wife and I were cleaning the kitchen after dinner. Nothing unusual was happening. Water ran from the faucet. Dishes clinked softly. One of the children was finishing homework in the next room. The atmosphere felt calm. Then my wife said something completely unexpected. She smiled gently and asked, Do you ever feel like we're all together, but somehow not really together? I stopped drying a plate. For a second, I honestly thought she had somehow read my mind. It was almost the exact question I had been wrestling with for days. Suddenly, I realized something important. I was not the only person feeling this way. The feeling was not just mine. It belonged to our family. Maybe even to many families. What started as a simple conversation in the kitchen quickly became one of the most honest discussions we had shared in years. And before that conversation ended, my wife would reveal an observation about our daily lives that neither of us could ignore. It was a small observation. Almost embarrassingly simple. Yet it would expose the hidden reason our house sometimes felt less like a home than we wanted to admit. And once we saw it, everything began to change. Busy lives, empty moments. The conversation in the kitchen should have lasted only a few minutes. We had dishes to finish. The kids were still awake. Tomorrow would be another busy day. Yet neither my wife nor I walked away. Her question hung in the air longer than either of us expected. Do you ever feel like we're all together, but somehow not really together? The strange thing was that I already knew the answer. I had been feeling it for weeks. Maybe longer. Maybe years. I simply had not found the courage to say it out loud. I looked around the kitchen. Everything appeared normal. The refrigerator hummed quietly. Family photos decorated the walls. The house felt safe and comfortable. Yet suddenly it seemed possible that comfort and connection were not the same thing. My wife continued speaking. She told me she had noticed something recently. Every evening, everyone arrived home. Everyone entered the same house. Everyone shared the same space. Yet somehow we often ended up living separate lives under the same roof. One child disappeared into homework. Another watched videos. I checked emails. She finished household tasks. Hours passed. Then bedtime arrived. Another day completed. Another day gone. Nothing terrible happened. But nothing deeply meaningful happened either. Her observation hit me harder than I expected. Because it was true. Completely true. Modern life rarely falls apart dramatically. More often, it slowly drifts. Relationships do not usually weaken overnight. They weaken one distracted evening at a time. One missed conversation at a time. One postponed moment at a time. Researchers who study relationships often describe connection as something that requires repeated small interactions. Not grand gestures. Not expensive vacations. Not perfect circumstances. Small moments. Tiny moments. A smile. A question. A shared laugh. A few minutes of genuine attention. These moments seem insignificant until they disappear. Then their absence becomes impossible to ignore. That night, after everyone went to bed, I found myself thinking about a memory from several years earlier. It was not an important memory by most standards. No major life event occurred. No huge achievement was involved. I simply remembered sitting around a table with family members, talking for hours. Nobody checked a phone. Nobody rushed away. Nobody multitasked. The conversation wandered in every direction imaginable. We laughed. We told stories. We repeated old jokes. Looking back, the evening was completely ordinary. Yet it remained vivid in my mind years later. Why? Because I felt connected. Truly connected. The memory made me realize something fascinating. Most of our happiest memories are not built from extraordinary experiences. They are built from ordinary moments experienced fully. Yet modern culture constantly encourages us to chase the extraordinary. Bigger goals. Bigger achievements. Bigger purchases. Bigger experiences. Meanwhile, the small daily moments that actually shape our lives often receive very little attention. The next morning, I decided to try something unusual. Instead of immediately reaching for my phone after waking up, I left it on the nightstand. It sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Such a tiny action. Yet the urge to check notifications appeared almost instantly. Emails. News updates. Messages. My brain wanted stimulation before my feet even touched the floor. That realization was slightly alarming. I had always considered myself disciplined. Yet here I was struggling to ignore a device for a few minutes. Scientists often explain this phenomenon through the brain's reward system. Every notification carries the possibility of something interesting. The brain learns to seek that possibility repeatedly. Over time, constant stimulation becomes normal. Silence feels uncomfortable. Stillness feels unfamiliar. Presence becomes difficult. As I sat quietly drinking coffee that morning, I noticed something I had not noticed in a long time. Sunlight was coming through the kitchen window. Birds moved across the backyard. The house felt peaceful. Nothing extraordinary was happening. Yet for the first time in weeks, I felt calm. It was such a simple moment that I almost laughed. How many peaceful moments had I missed because my attention was always somewhere else? That question followed me throughout the day. At work, I began noticing similar patterns everywhere. People attended meetings while checking messages. Friends sat together during lunch while scrolling through separate screens. Even in waiting rooms, elevators, and coffee shops, most eyes were directed downward toward glowing rectangles. Again, technology was not the enemy. Phones were not evil. The issue was balance. Somewhere along the way, many of us had become connected to everyone and present with no one. That evening brought another surprising discovery. During dinner, I made a conscious effort to listen more carefully. Not dramatically. Not awkwardly. I simply paid attention. Really paid attention. One child shared a funny story from school. My wife talked about a conversation she had earlier in the day. Someone made a joke. Everyone laughed. The conversation lasted only 20 minutes. Yet something felt different. The atmosphere felt warmer. More alive. More real. It reminded me of something psychologists often discuss. Human beings have a deep need to feel seen and heard. Not judged. Not fixed. Heard. Sometimes the greatest gift we can offer another person is our full attention. No advice. No solutions. Just attention. The surprising part was that giving attention also changed how I felt. I expected it to help others. I did not expect it to help me. Yet I finished dinner feeling lighter than usual. More connected. More grateful. More present. That single evening did not solve everything. Of course not. Real change rarely happens that quickly. But it revealed something important. Home might not be created by walls. It might be created by moments. Moments repeated consistently over time. Moments of listening. Moments of kindness. Moments of presence. The more I thought about it, the more curious I became. What if our family could create more of those moments? What if the feeling of home was not something we discovered but something we intentionally built? The idea seemed promising. Yet I had no idea how difficult that process would become. Because only a few days later, a completely ordinary disagreement would expose a hidden problem none of us had fully recognized. The disagreement itself was small. Almost laughably small. But what it revealed beneath the surface would force us to confront a truth about our family that had been quietly growing for years. And once that truth appeared, ignoring it was no longer an option. What many people never notice. The disagreement began with something so small that it almost sounds ridiculous when I think about it now. No major argument. No dramatic confrontation. No slammed doors. In fact, if you had walked into our house that evening, you probably would not have noticed anything unusual. Yet sometimes the smallest moments reveal the biggest truths. It happened on a regular weeknight. Dinner was finished. The dishes were waiting. One child was working on a school project. Another was watching something on a tablet. My wife was organizing a few things for the next day. I was sitting on the couch answering messages that felt urgent at the time. Then my wife asked me a simple question. "Did you hear what I just said?" I looked up immediately. The problem was that I had not heard a single word. I had been physically present. Mentally, I was somewhere else entirely. I apologized and asked her to repeat herself. She did. But then she smiled in a way that caught my attention. It was not an angry smile. It was not a frustrated smile. It was the kind of smile people give when they have noticed a pattern. "You know," she said gently, "this happens a lot." Her words were not intended to hurt me. That is exactly why they were so powerful. If she had been angry, I might have become defensive. Instead, I became curious. Was she right? The honest answer was yes. And once I admitted that, I started noticing something that had been hiding in plain sight. We often think relationships are damaged by huge problems. Betrayal. Conflict. Major life crises. Those things certainly matter. But many relationships slowly weaken for a different reason. People stop paying attention. Not because they do not care. Because they become distracted. Overloaded. Exhausted. Modern life creates a strange challenge. Most families spend enormous effort building a good life. Yet in the process, they sometimes forget to experience the life they are building. That realization stayed with me over the following days. I began observing people more carefully. At grocery stores. Restaurants. Parks. Coffee shops. Everywhere I looked, I noticed a similar pattern. People sat together but often seemed mentally somewhere else. Friends gathered around tables while staring at phones. Families shared meals while scrolling through screens. Couples walked side by side without speaking. Again, technology was not the villain. The real issue seemed deeper. Attention had become fragmented. Our focus was constantly being pulled in dozens of directions. The human brain was never designed to process endless streams of information every waking hour. Psychologists often describe attention as a limited resource. Every notification, every headline, every email requires a small piece of mental energy. Individually, these interruptions seem harmless. Collectively, they can dramatically affect how present we feel. That idea fascinated me. Because perhaps the feeling of home had less to do with location and more to do with attention. Think about it. Have you ever spent time with someone who made you feel like the most important person in the room? They listened. They looked at you when you spoke. They remembered details. They were fully there. Most people remember that feeling. And they rarely forget it. Why? Because being fully seen is surprisingly rare. One Saturday afternoon, I experienced something that pushed this idea even further. Our neighborhood hosted a small gathering at a local park. Families brought food. Children played games. People sat under trees talking for hours. It was not a major event. Just ordinary people spending time together. Yet I noticed something remarkable. The people who appeared happiest were often the least distracted. They were engaged in conversations. They were laughing. They were listening. They seemed connected to the moment they were living. I found myself talking with an older neighbor who had lived in the area for decades. At one point, I asked him what made a community feel like home. His answer surprised me. He did not mention houses. He did not mention safety ratings or property values. Instead, he said, a place starts feeling like home when people know your name, notice when you're gone, and are happy when you come back. I could not stop thinking about that sentence. It sounded so simple. Yet the more I reflected on it, the deeper it became. Human beings need belonging. Not occasionally. Consistently. We need to feel that our presence matters. That our lives intersect with other lives in meaningful ways. Researchers studying well-being frequently reach similar conclusions. People who maintain strong social connections often report greater happiness and resilience. Community matters. Family matters. Friendship matters. Not because they eliminate life's challenges. Because they help us face those challenges together. That evening, after returning home from the park, I noticed something different. For the first time in a long while, our house felt warmer. Nothing had changed physically. Same furniture. Same walls. Same rooms. Yet something felt different. I began wondering whether home is partly created through repeated acts of attention. Small moments accumulated over time. A conversation. A shared meal. A story told twice because everyone enjoys hearing it again. A simple question asked with genuine interest. These moments seem insignificant while they are happening. Yet they quietly become the foundation of belonging. The more I thought about it, the more one uncomfortable truth emerged. I had spent years improving external things while neglecting internal ones. I knew how to maintain a house. I was less skilled at maintaining connection. The realization was humbling. But it was also hopeful. Because unlike many problems, this one seemed fixable. Attention could be practiced. Presence could be strengthened. Relationships could grow. The challenge was remembering to prioritize them before life became busy again. Unfortunately, that challenge was about to become very real. A few days later, I overheard a conversation that completely changed my perspective. It happened accidentally. I was not supposed to hear it. Yet what I heard revealed how one member of our family had been experiencing our home in a way I never expected. The words were simple. Honest. Unfiltered. and they exposed a truth that left me standing completely still. In that moment, I realized our journey toward understanding the meaning of home was only beginning. What I heard next would force all of us to look at our family through a very different lens. A small argument, a big discovery. What I overheard was not a secret. Nobody was hiding anything from me. In fact, the conversation was completely innocent. Yet it revealed something that I had failed to see despite living under the same roof every single day. It happened on a quiet evening. I had just finished putting away groceries and was walking through the hallway when I heard one of my children talking with a friend during an online call. I was not trying to listen. I simply happened to hear a sentence as I passed by the room. The sentence stopped me immediately. My child said, "We're all really busy lately. Sometimes it feels like everyone is doing their own thing." There was no anger in those words. No accusation. No drama. Just a simple observation. Yet I stood there for a moment, completely still. Because it sounded familiar. Very familiar. My wife had noticed something similar. I had been feeling something similar. And now one of our children was experiencing it too. Suddenly, a pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. The strange thing was that our family was functioning well on paper. We ate together frequently. We lived in the same house. We supported one another. We attended school events, family activities, and community gatherings. If someone had asked me whether we were a close family, I would have answered yes without hesitation. Yet perhaps there was a difference between being close and feeling connected. That thought stayed with me for days. Then came the disagreement that changed everything. It started over something so ordinary that most people would forget it within minutes. We were discussing weekend plans. One child wanted to attend a sports event. Another preferred a different activity. My wife had something she hoped we could do together. I had already made assumptions about how the weekend would unfold. Nothing unusual. Families have conversations like this all the time. But as we talked, I noticed something unexpected. Nobody was truly listening. Each person was focused on explaining their own perspective. Everyone wanted to be understood. Very few people were trying to understand. The conversation remained polite, yet frustration slowly increased. At one point, voices became slightly sharper. Not hostile. Just tired. That was when my wife said something that instantly changed the atmosphere. "Maybe the problem isn't the schedule," she said. "Maybe the problem is that we're all trying to fit our lives together instead of actually sharing them." The room became quiet. Her words landed with surprising force. Because deep down, everyone knew she might be right. The weekend plans were not the real issue. The real issue was that our days had become fragmented. School. Work. Activities. Responsibilities. Screens. Deadlines. Appointments. We spent enormous energy managing our lives. Yet very little energy discussing how those lives actually felt. Researchers often talk about emotional connection as a predictor of relationship satisfaction. Not perfection. Not agreement. Connection. People who regularly share thoughts, experiences, concerns, and emotions tend to feel more bonded over time. The science is interesting because it challenges many assumptions. Most people believe strong relationships are built through major moments. Weddings. Vacations. Celebrations. Milestones. Those moments matter. But research repeatedly suggests that everyday interactions often have an even greater impact. Small conversations. Shared routines. Genuine curiosity. Consistent attention. The foundation of belonging is usually built one ordinary day at a time. As I reflected on this idea, I realized how easy it is to overlook. In modern American life, efficiency is often rewarded. Productivity is admired. Being busy is almost expected. But connection requires something very different. It requires slowing down. It requires attention. It requires making room for conversations that do not have a practical purpose. Conversations that simply help people feel known. That realization led to another uncomfortable question. When was the last time I asked my family meaningful questions without being distracted? Not questions about schedules. Not questions about tasks. Real questions. Questions about feelings. Dreams. Worries. Experiences. The answer was not as often as I wanted. One evening, I decided to try something simple. During dinner, I asked everyone to share one thing that had surprised them that week. At first, the responses were short. A funny classroom story. An unexpected comment from a coworker. A random observation. Nothing remarkable. Then something interesting happened. The stories became longer. Questions followed. Laughter appeared. New details emerged. 20 minutes passed surprisingly fast. Nobody seemed eager to leave the table. When dinner ended, I noticed something different. The room felt lighter. Warmer. More alive. It was not because a major problem had been solved. It was because people felt heard. That experience taught me something powerful. Connection often begins with curiosity. Genuine curiosity communicates value. It tells another person, your experiences matter to me. In a world full of distractions, that message carries enormous weight. The following weeks brought additional changes. Small changes. Nothing dramatic. More conversations. Fewer interruptions. More listening. More shared moments. Yet the most surprising discovery was still ahead. One Saturday morning, while organizing old photographs, we found a collection of family pictures from several years earlier. As we looked through them together, something unexpected happened. Everyone became unusually quiet. There was a specific photograph that captured our attention. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Just a family sitting together. Smiling. Nothing special. Yet the longer we stared at it, the more powerful it became. Because that photograph captured something we had been searching for without realizing it. A feeling. A feeling that seemed increasingly rare in modern life. A feeling connected to belonging. Security. Presence. Home. What we discovered while looking at that photograph would completely transform how we understood our family and the kind of life we wanted to create. Together. And strangely enough, the answer had been sitting in front of us the entire time. The picture that revealed everything. The photograph looked completely ordinary. In fact, if you had seen it mixed among hundreds of other family pictures, you probably would have scrolled past it without giving it a second thought. There were no famous landmarks in the background. No expensive vacation destination. No major celebration. No trophies, awards, or signs of achievement. Just our family sitting together on a blanket during a summer afternoon at a local park. Yet somehow that simple photograph captured everyone's attention. We sat around the dining table looking through old albums when one of the children suddenly pointed at it. "I remember that day," they said with a smile. Then another family member remembered something about the same afternoon. Then another detail appeared. Then another. Within minutes, everyone was talking at once. The strange part was not the photograph itself. The strange part was the emotion it created. Looking at that picture felt different from looking at many others. There was something hidden inside it. Something difficult to explain. As the stories continued, I realized none of us were talking about what we had done that day. Nobody mentioned where we went afterward. Nobody talked about money, schedules, accomplishments, or responsibilities. Instead, everyone remembered how they felt. We remembered laughing. We remembered sitting together for hours. We remembered telling stories and sharing food. We remembered having nowhere important to be. That realization stopped me. Because it exposed a pattern I had never noticed before. The memories we treasured most were not necessarily linked to exciting events. They were linked to emotional experiences. Researchers studying memory have discovered something fascinating. Human beings often remember emotions more strongly than facts. Years later, people may forget exactly what happened during a specific day, but they remember how that day made them feel. Suddenly the photograph looked completely different. It was no longer a picture of a family sitting in a park. It was evidence. Evidence that some of the most meaningful moments in life are surprisingly simple. As we continued looking through old photos, another pattern emerged. The images that generated the strongest emotional reactions shared something in common. They captured moments when nobody seemed rushed. Nobody appeared distracted. Nobody looked stressed. Everyone looked present. That word had been appearing repeatedly throughout this journey. Present. Not perfect. Present. There is a huge difference. Many people spend years chasing the perfect life. The perfect home. The perfect career. The perfect schedule. The perfect balance. Yet perfection has a strange habit of moving further away every time you approach it. Presence works differently. Presence is available right now. It exists in ordinary moments. It requires attention, not perfection. That afternoon, after everyone left the table, I kept thinking about the photograph. Why had it affected us so strongly? Eventually, I came to a realization that felt both obvious and profound. The photograph captured something that had become increasingly rare. It captured togetherness without distraction. In today's world, that combination is surprisingly valuable. Modern life constantly pulls our attention in different directions. Emails arrive at all hours. News updates never stop. Social media platforms compete for every spare minute. Work often follows people home through screens and notifications. Even leisure time can become crowded with digital noise. None of these things are inherently bad. Technology has improved countless aspects of life. But there is a hidden cost when attention becomes permanently divided. Psychologists often discuss the concept of cognitive overload. When the brain processes too much information, it becomes more difficult to focus deeply, listen carefully, and connect meaningfully with others. In simple terms, An overwhelmed mind struggles to be fully present. Looking back, I realized how often this had happened in our home. We were spending time together, but our attention was scattered. We were sharing space without always sharing experiences. We were communicating, but not always connecting. The photograph reminded us of what connection actually felt like. Later that evening, I sat on the back porch thinking about everything we had discovered. The sun was beginning to set. The neighborhood was quiet. A few children played basketball in a nearby driveway. A dog barked in the distance. For the first time in a long while, I was not thinking about tomorrow's responsibilities. I was simply observing the moment. And that was when another thought appeared. What if home is not a place we find? What if home is a feeling we create through repeated moments of presence? The idea seemed simple. Yet it explained so much. It explained why some people feel lonely inside beautiful houses. It explained why some families remain emotionally distant despite spending years together. It explained why certain memories stay with us forever while others disappear. Home might be less about where we live and more about how we live together. The more I thought about this, the more hopeful I became. Because unlike many challenges in life, this one seemed within our control. We could choose to listen more carefully. We could choose to spend time differently. We could choose presence over constant distraction. Small choices. Repeated consistently. Yet there was still something we had not fully addressed. We had identified part of the problem. We had recognized the importance of connection. But we had not yet figured out how to protect it from the pressures of everyday life. That challenge would arrive sooner than expected. Only a few days later, our family experienced a week that felt unusually hectic. Schedules collided. Deadlines appeared. Responsibilities multiplied. The pace of life accelerated once again. And during that chaotic week, we discovered something surprising about modern American life that many people never talk about openly. It was not a crisis. It was not a tragedy. It was something far more common. Something millions of families experience every day without realizing its long-term impact. Understanding that hidden challenge would become one of the most important lessons in our journey toward truly feeling at home. The dinner that changed everything. The week started like many others. Nothing dramatic happened. Nobody received shocking news. No major crisis appeared. Yet by Wednesday evening, it felt as if our family was running through life instead of living it. One child had extra school activities. Another had a project deadline. My work schedule became unusually demanding. My wife was juggling multiple responsibilities at the same time. Every day seemed to begin with urgency and end with exhaustion. If you have ever lived through a busy season, you probably know the feeling. You wake up already thinking about what needs to be done. You move from one task to another. You answer messages. You solve problems. You check schedules. You try to stay organized. Then suddenly the day is over. The strange part is that you can spend an entire week accomplishing things while barely experiencing the week itself. That realization hit me one Thursday evening. We were all home, yet the atmosphere felt different. Everyone seemed tired. Not physically exhausted. Emotionally scattered. We were functioning. But something was missing. Then my wife suggested something simple. What if we have dinner together tonight without any phones, television, or distractions? At first, the idea sounded almost laughably small. After all, how much difference could one meal make? Yet looking back, that dinner became one of the most important moments in our journey. The reason had nothing to do with food. It had everything to do with attention. When dinner began, the atmosphere felt slightly awkward. Nobody admitted it, but we were all used to having distractions nearby. A phone on the table. A notification. Background noise. Something competing for attention. Without those distractions, the room felt unusually quiet. Then something unexpected happened. People started talking. Really talking. At first, the conversation focused on ordinary things. School. Work. Weekend plans. Daily experiences. Nothing remarkable. Then one of the children shared a funny story. Everyone laughed. Another story followed. Then another. Suddenly the conversation developed a rhythm that felt natural and effortless. Minutes passed. Then more minutes. Nobody seemed eager to leave. Nobody reached for a screen. Nobody looked bored. The atmosphere felt alive. I remember sitting there and realizing something important. Connection often does not require extraordinary effort. It requires opportunity. People naturally connect when given enough space and attention. During that dinner, one of my children asked a question that caught everyone by surprise. What was your favorite family memory? It was such a simple question. Yet it completely transformed the conversation. One by one, everyone shared an answer. Some memories involved vacations. Others involved holidays. But the most interesting part was this: many favorite memories were surprisingly ordinary. A rainy afternoon spent playing games. A spontaneous road trip. A backyard barbecue. A movie night. A long conversation. Once again, the pattern appeared. The moments people treasured most were rarely expensive. They were rarely impressive. They were meaningful because they were shared. Researchers who study happiness often find similar results. Human beings tend to derive lasting satisfaction from relationships and experiences more than from material possessions. New purchases create temporary excitement. Genuine connection creates lasting memories. Listening to everyone share stories, I realized something that had been hidden in plain sight. Home is not built during life's biggest moments. Home is built during ordinary moments repeated consistently over time. 1,000 small interactions create the feeling that we belong somewhere. 1,000 conversations create trust. 1,000 shared experiences create connection. Nobody notices the process while it is happening. Yet over years, those moments become the emotional architecture of a family. The dinner continued much longer than expected. At one point, someone mentioned a funny family tradition we had nearly forgotten. Another person remembered an embarrassing story from years earlier. Laughter filled the room repeatedly. The atmosphere felt warm in a way that was difficult to describe. Then something happened that surprised me. I noticed how relaxed everyone looked. Shoulders seemed lower. Faces seemed softer. The usual tension of busy schedules had faded. It reminded me of something psychologists often discuss. Human beings are not designed to operate in a constant state of urgency. The nervous system requires periods of safety, connection, and recovery. Meaningful social interaction can help create those experiences. In simple terms, feeling connected helps people feel calmer. That evening provided living proof. Nobody had solved all their problems. Deadlines still existed. Responsibilities remained. Yet everyone seemed lighter. More grounded. More present. After dinner ended, nobody rushed away immediately. Conversations continued. Stories continued. The evening unfolded naturally. Later, as I cleaned the kitchen, I realized something remarkable. The most important part of the night had not been what we discussed. It had been how we felt. Seen. Heard. Connected. Valued. Those emotions cannot be purchased. They cannot be downloaded. They cannot be scheduled automatically. They emerge when people give each other attention. The following days brought an unexpected change. The atmosphere inside our home felt different. Not dramatically different. Subtly different. Conversations happened more easily. Laughter appeared more often. There was a greater sense of togetherness. One dinner had not transformed our family overnight. But it had reminded us of something we needed. Something many families need. Time together without constant distraction. The lesson seemed obvious once we experienced it. Yet so many people miss it because modern life constantly pushes in the opposite direction. More speed. More stimulation. More busyness. More noise. What we discovered was the opposite. Sometimes less creates more. Less distraction creates more connection. Less rushing creates more presence. Less noise creates more meaning. I thought we had finally figured everything out. I thought we had found the answer we were searching for. But a few days later, something happened that challenged everything again. It was not an argument. It was not a crisis. It was a conversation with one of my children. A conversation so simple that it would have been easy to overlook. Yet hidden inside that conversation was a perspective none of us had considered before. And that perspective would completely reshape our understanding of what it truly means to feel at home. What my child taught me about home. The conversation happened on a completely ordinary afternoon. There was nothing special about the day. No holiday. No family celebration. No important event marked on the calendar. In fact, if I had known how meaningful that conversation would become, I probably would have paid even closer attention. But perhaps that is exactly how life works. The moments that change us rarely announce their arrival. They appear quietly, disguised as ordinary experiences. That afternoon, one of my children was sitting at the kitchen table finishing homework while I worked nearby. The house was calm. Sunlight filled the room. Outside, a few neighbors were walking their dogs along the sidewalk. Everything felt peaceful. Then my child asked a question. "Dad, why do adults always seem busy?" I smiled because the question sounded innocent. Yet the more I thought about it, the harder it became to answer. Why do adults always seem busy? Most adults could probably give a long list of reasons. Work responsibilities. Financial obligations. Household tasks. Family commitments. Endless schedules. Endless deadlines. Endless things to manage. Yet children often notice something deeper than the explanations adults provide. They notice patterns. They notice emotions. They notice what people actually do, not what they say. Before I could answer, my child continued speaking. Sometimes it feels like grown-ups are always thinking about the next thing. That sentence hit me harder than expected. Because it was true. Very true. Modern life encourages constant forward thinking. Finish this task. Prepare for the next task. Solve this problem. Anticipate the next problem. Plan. Organize. Optimize. Repeat. There is value in planning. Of course there is. But somewhere along the way, many people become so focused on the future that they stop experiencing the present. The habit of mentally living somewhere else. Even during good moments. Especially during good moments. We often postpone happiness without realizing it. We tell ourselves we will relax after the next project. After the next promotion. After the next milestone. After the next challenge. But life keeps creating new milestones and new challenges. The finish line keeps moving. The future keeps arriving. And suddenly years have passed. My child then said something even more surprising. I think home is the place where people pay attention to each other. For a moment, I simply stared. Not because the statement was complicated. Because it was remarkably simple. And remarkably accurate. Home is the place where people pay attention to each other. The words stayed with me long after the conversation ended. That evening, I found myself thinking about how differently children view the world. Adults often define success through measurable achievements. Income. Property. Career growth. Accomplishments. Children tend to focus on experiences. Time spent together. Shared laughter. Feeling safe. Feeling loved. Feeling noticed. Researchers studying childhood development frequently emphasize the importance of emotional availability. Children benefit enormously when caregivers are responsive, attentive, and emotionally present. Interestingly, adults benefit from the same things. Human beings never outgrow the need to feel valued. We never outgrow the need for belonging. We never outgrow the desire to matter to someone. The next day, I decided to conduct a small experiment. Nothing scientific. Nothing complicated. I simply paid closer attention to the moments that seemed to make family members happiest. The results surprised me. Happiness rarely appeared during expensive activities. It rarely appeared during highly planned experiences. Instead, it appeared during simple interactions. A conversation before school. A shared joke during dinner. A walk through the neighborhood. A story told before bedtime. Tiny moments. Yet those moments consistently generated warmth, connection, and joy. It reminded me of an idea often discussed in positive psychology. People tend to underestimate the power of ordinary experiences. We assume major events create the greatest happiness. In reality, daily interactions often shape emotional well-being more profoundly than we realize. Looking back, this explained why certain memories remained vivid for years. They were not necessarily dramatic. They were emotionally meaningful. A few days later, our family spent an evening sitting outside watching the sunset. No screens. No schedules. No major agenda. Just conversation. At one point, someone asked what superpower they would choose if they could have any power in the world. The answers were creative and hilarious. Flying. Invisibility. Time travel. Teleportation. Then one child said something unexpected. I think I'd choose the power to make people stop worrying. Everyone laughed at first. Then the silence arrived. Because beneath the humor was something profound. Children often see things adults overlook. They notice stress. They notice tension. They notice distraction. They notice when people are physically present but emotionally absent. That evening reinforced a lesson I had been slowly learning throughout this journey. Home is not created by perfection. It is created by presence. Families do not need perfect schedules, perfect communication, perfect circumstances. They need connection. Consistent connection. Small moments of attention repeated over time. The realization felt liberating. Because perfection is exhausting. Presence is achievable. Anyone can practice listening more carefully. Anyone can choose to look up from a screen. Anyone can ask one more question. Anyone can spend a few extra minutes engaged in a meaningful conversation. Small actions. Significant impact. Yet even as our family grew closer, another challenge was approaching. One that affects millions of households across America every year. It is not discussed often enough. It does not appear suddenly. Instead, it quietly enters through busy schedules, endless obligations, and the constant pressure to do more. During the following weeks, life accelerated once again. Activities multiplied. Responsibilities increased. The pace became overwhelming. And that was when we discovered the hidden force that prevents many families from feeling at home even when they love one another deeply. Understanding that force would become one of the most important turning points in our entire story. And once we recognized it, we could never see our daily lives the same way again. When life starts moving too fast. Have you ever reached the end of a week and wondered where it went? Not because something exciting happened. Not because you traveled somewhere. Not because you experienced a major life event. Simply because the days moved so fast that they seemed to disappear. That was exactly what happened to our family. For a while, things had been improving. Conversations felt more meaningful. Family dinners felt warmer. We were becoming more intentional about spending time together. It felt like we were finally moving in the right direction. Then life happened. Not bad life. Just normal life. The kind of life millions of families experience every day across America. School schedules became more demanding. Work responsibilities increased. Community events filled the calendar. Appointments appeared unexpectedly. Tasks multiplied. Deadlines arrived. Suddenly, every day seemed packed from morning until night. At first, none of us thought much about it. After all, being busy felt normal. In many ways, American culture encourages busyness. Ask someone how they are doing and one of the most common responses is, busy. Sometimes people say it proudly. Sometimes they say it with exhaustion. Either way, it has become part of everyday life. But during that season, I started noticing something concerning. The closer our schedules became to full capacity, the more difficult it became to maintain the connection we had been rebuilding. Nobody intended for it to happen. Nobody made a conscious choice to become distant. Yet the pressure of constant activity created a subtle shift. Conversations became shorter. Meals became quicker. Attention became fragmented again. One evening, I walked through the house and noticed something strange. Every family member was productive. One person was studying. Another was answering emails. Someone else was organizing materials for the next day. Everyone was accomplishing something useful. Yet the house felt oddly quiet. Not peaceful. Isolated. It reminded me of an airport terminal. Lots of movement. Lots of activity. Very little connection. That image stayed with me because it captured an important truth. Activity and togetherness are not the same thing. A family can be incredibly busy and still feel disconnected. Researchers who study stress often explain that chronic busyness affects more than schedules. It affects attention, patience, emotional availability, and communication. When people feel overwhelmed, their brains naturally prioritize efficiency. Survival mode takes over. Essential tasks receive attention. Everything else gets pushed aside. Unfortunately, meaningful connection often ends up in the everything else category. The following week brought an experience that made this reality impossible to ignore. One evening, I arrived home later than usual. The day had been packed with meetings, decisions, and unexpected complications. I felt mentally exhausted. As I walked through the front door, I noticed something. The house looked exactly the same as it always had. Yet it felt different. Not because anything was wrong. Because everyone seemed to be moving independently through separate worlds. One child was finishing assignments. Another was preparing for an upcoming event. My wife was handling several responsibilities at once. I was thinking about work problems that still needed solutions. Physically, we were together. Emotionally, we were scattered. The realization felt familiar. It was the same feeling that had started this entire journey. The feeling of being inside a home without fully experiencing home. Later that evening, I sat outside for a few minutes to clear my thoughts. The neighborhood was calm. Porch lights glowed softly. A few families walked along the sidewalks. Somewhere nearby, laughter drifted through the air. Watching those ordinary scenes, I began asking myself a difficult question. What if the biggest threat to connection is not conflict? What if it is distraction? Most people prepare for major challenges. Financial difficulties. Health concerns. Family disagreements. But very few people prepare for the slow erosion caused by constant busyness. Yet that erosion can quietly affect relationships over months and years. It does not happen dramatically. It happens gradually. One rushed conversation at a time. One missed opportunity at a time. One distracted evening at a time. The next day, something unexpected happened during breakfast. One of my children asked a simple question. Why does everyone always seem like they're in a hurry? Once again, a child had managed to identify something adults often overlook. The question lingered in my mind throughout the day. Why are we always in a hurry? Sometimes the answer is obvious. Responsibilities matter. Goals matter. Commitments matter. But sometimes we remain in a hurry simply because we have become accustomed to it. Busyness becomes a habit. A lifestyle. An identity. Slowing down begins to feel uncomfortable. Yet there is an interesting contradiction here. The moments people remember most fondly are rarely the rushed ones. Think about your favorite memories. Chances are they involve laughter, conversation, presence, connection, and shared experiences. Those things require time. They require attention. They require enough space for life to be experienced rather than merely managed. This realization led our family to try something new. We began protecting certain moments more intentionally. Not perfectly. Not rigidly. Simply intentionally. A shared meal. A conversation after dinner. A walk through the neighborhood. Small moments that could easily disappear if left unprotected. The results were surprisingly powerful. We did not become less responsible. We did not abandon our commitments. We simply stopped allowing every available minute to be consumed by activity. In doing so, we discovered something valuable. Rest is not laziness. Connection is not wasted time. Presence is productive in ways that cannot always be measured. Emotional well-being depends on it. Relationships depend on it. Families depend on it. Yet even with these improvements, another important lesson was waiting for us. A lesson that would finally answer the question that started everything. The question about home. The answer would arrive through an experience so ordinary that it almost seemed insignificant at first. But hidden inside that experience was a truth that would completely change the way I understood family, belonging, and the meaning of feeling at home. And once I understood it, the question that had followed me for so long finally began to make sense. The answer was simpler than I thought. For months, I had been chasing a question that refused to leave me alone. It followed me during quiet mornings, busy afternoons, family dinners, and late nights when the house had finally gone silent. The question seemed simple, but every answer I tried felt incomplete. What does it really mean to feel at home? I thought the answer might come from a big realization. A life-changing event. A powerful conversation. Maybe even some dramatic moment that would suddenly make everything clear. Instead, the answer arrived on a completely ordinary Saturday morning. The kind of morning most people would forget. The kind of morning that never appears in photo albums or social media posts. The kind of morning that quietly changes your life while pretending to be nothing special. It started with rain. Not a storm. Just a steady rain falling outside the windows. The sky was gray. The neighborhood was quiet. Weekend plans had been canceled because of the weather. Nobody seemed disappointed. In fact, there was something strangely comforting about being forced to stay home. No rushing. No driving. No schedules. No appointments. Just time. Pure, unscheduled time. Looking back, I realize how rare that had become. Modern life often treats free time like an empty space that needs to be filled immediately. If there is a gap in the schedule, we rush to occupy it. We add another activity. Another task. Another obligation. Yet that rainy morning offered something different. It offered stillness. At first, everyone did their own thing. Someone made coffee. Someone read a book. Someone worked on a puzzle. The atmosphere felt relaxed. Then something unexpected happened. Without planning it, people slowly began gathering in the same room. One conversation started. Then another. Someone remembered an old family story. Someone else added forgotten details. Laughter appeared. More stories followed. Hours passed. Nobody seemed interested in leaving. The rain continued tapping softly against the windows while our family sat together sharing memories, observations, and random thoughts. There was no agenda. No goal. No productivity. Just connection. At one point, I stopped talking and simply looked around the room. Everyone seemed comfortable, relaxed, present. Nobody was performing. Nobody was trying to impress anyone. Nobody was distracted by the next task waiting to be completed. For a brief moment, life felt incredibly simple. And that was when the answer finally arrived. Not dramatically. Quietly. Home is not the place where everything is perfect. Home is the place where you can stop pretending. The realization surprised me because it connected so many pieces of the puzzle. Throughout this journey, I had been looking at home through the lens of location, routines, responsibilities, and daily life. But underneath all those things was something deeper. Emotional safety. The ability to be yourself. The confidence that you are accepted even when you are tired, imperfect, confused, or struggling. Researchers who study belonging often emphasize the importance of psychological safety. Human beings thrive when they feel accepted. When they feel understood. When they feel valued without constantly needing to prove their worth. Suddenly, many of my favorite memories made sense. They were not special because of where they happened. They were special because of how they felt. I felt safe. I felt connected. I felt seen. Those feelings transformed ordinary moments into lasting memories. As the afternoon continued, I paid attention to small details. The way people listened to each other. The way laughter emerged naturally. The way stories flowed without effort. None of it was extraordinary. Yet all of it felt meaningful. Modern culture often encourages us to search for meaning in massive achievements. Bigger goals. Bigger success. Bigger experiences. But sitting there with my family, I realized meaning often hides inside small moments. A conversation. A shared memory. A joke told for the 10th time. A rainy afternoon with nowhere else to be. These moments rarely look important while they are happening. Yet years later, they often become the moments we treasure most. The more I reflected on this idea, the more I understood why so many people struggle with the feeling of home. Many people spend years improving external conditions while neglecting internal experiences. We upgrade houses. We organize schedules. We pursue success. We solve practical problems. All valuable things. Yet home ultimately lives in relationships. It lives in trust. It lives in connection. It lives in attention. That realization felt incredibly hopeful. Because unlike many things in life, these qualities do not depend on wealth, status, or perfect circumstances. They depend on choices. Small choices repeated consistently. Choosing to listen. Choosing to slow down. Choosing to be present. Choosing to protect meaningful moments from unnecessary distractions. That rainy Saturday taught me another lesson as well. Happiness is often quieter than people expect. It does not always arrive with excitement and celebration. Sometimes it arrives through peace. Through comfort. Through belonging. Through the simple realization that you are exactly where you need to be. Later that evening, after everyone had gone about their activities again, I found myself standing by the window watching the rain. The neighborhood looked calm. Lights glowed warmly inside nearby houses. Families moved through their evening routines. Ordinary scenes. Ordinary lives. Yet suddenly they seemed beautiful. Because I understood something I had been missing for a long time. Home is not created by walls. It is created by people. Home is not measured in square footage. It is measured in connection. Home is not where life becomes perfect. It is where life becomes shared. And although that realization answered many questions, one final lesson still remained. Perhaps the most important lesson of all. A lesson that would emerge through a conversation none of us expected. A conversation that would transform this personal journey into a message worth sharing with anyone who has ever felt lonely, disconnected, overwhelmed, or uncertain about where they belong. What happened next would finally reveal why the search for home is really a search for something much deeper than a place. The truth about belonging. A few days after that rainy Saturday, something happened that brought this entire journey into focus. It was not a major event. No celebration. No family milestone. No dramatic breakthrough. In fact, it began with one of the simplest conversations imaginable. Yet by the time that conversation ended, I finally understood why the question about home had stayed with me for so long. The evening started quietly. Dinner had finished. The dishes were done. The house felt calm. One by one, family members drifted into the living room. Some sat on the couch. Others sat on the floor. Nobody seemed in a hurry to leave. There was no particular reason for everyone to stay together. They simply did. Looking back, those unplanned moments often became the most meaningful ones. The conversation wandered through different topics. Work. School. Funny stories. Future plans. Then someone asked a question that immediately caught everyone's attention. Do you think people can feel lonely even when they're surrounded by other people? The room became quiet. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence that appears when a question touches something real. Eventually, people began sharing their thoughts. One person talked about feeling isolated during stressful periods despite having supportive friends. Another described moments when they felt misunderstood even while spending time with people they cared about. The more we talked, the more a fascinating truth emerged. Loneliness is not always about being alone. Sometimes loneliness comes from feeling unseen. Sometimes it comes from feeling disconnected. Sometimes it comes from believing that nobody truly understands what you are experiencing. That realization felt important because it connected directly to everything I had been learning. Throughout this journey, I had assumed the search for home was about finding the right place, the right environment, the right circumstances. But perhaps the deeper search was about belonging. Human beings have always needed belonging. Long before smartphones, social media, busy schedules, and endless digital distractions, people depended on connection. Anthropologists often explain that our ancestors survived through cooperation. Communities mattered. Relationships mattered. Trust mattered. Belonging was not merely a pleasant experience. It was essential. Thousands of years later, that need remains deeply wired into human nature. We still want to feel accepted. We still want to feel understood. We still want to know that our presence matters. As the conversation continued, one of my children said something that immediately grabbed my attention. I think people feel at home when they don't have to earn their place every day. The room became quiet again. Not because anyone disagreed. Because the statement felt surprisingly profound. Think about it. Many parts of life require constant performance. At work, people prove their value through productivity. At school, students prove their abilities through grades. In social situations, people often worry about impressions and expectations. Yet home should feel different. Home should be one of the few places where love is not conditional on performance. One of the few places where people can be imperfect and still feel accepted. That idea resonated deeply with me. Researchers studying emotional well-being often emphasize the importance of unconditional positive regard. In simple terms, people thrive when they feel valued for who they are rather than solely for what they achieve. This does not mean expectations disappear. It means acceptance exists alongside expectations. Looking around the room, I realized that many of our happiest moments shared this quality. Nobody was trying to impress anyone. Nobody was competing. Nobody was performing. People were simply being themselves. That authenticity created comfort. Comfort created connection. Connection created belonging. Suddenly, the entire puzzle seemed clearer. Home is where belonging becomes possible. Not perfect belonging. Not permanent happiness. Real belonging. The kind that survives difficult days. The kind that remains present during disagreements. The kind that allows people to be honest about struggles and fears without fearing rejection. As the evening continued, the conversation shifted toward gratitude. We talked about things we appreciated but often overlooked. Shared meals. Family traditions. Simple routines. Ordinary conversations. The interesting thing about gratitude is that it changes what people notice. Instead of focusing on what is missing, attention shifts toward what is already present. Psychologists have studied gratitude extensively and consistently find links to increased happiness, stronger relationships, and greater life satisfaction. Yet gratitude often works quietly. It rarely announces itself. It grows through awareness, through attention, through noticing what might otherwise be ignored. That night, I noticed something I had not fully appreciated before. The feeling of home had been appearing throughout this journey in small ways. During family dinners. During walks. During conversations. During laughter. During ordinary moments. I had been searching for a single answer while the answer had been unfolding gradually all along. Home was not hidden somewhere in the future. It was already present whenever connection appeared. That realization felt both comforting and humbling. Comforting because the answer was accessible. Humbling because it had taken me so long to recognize it. As the evening came to an end, people slowly headed toward their rooms. The house became quieter. Yet something felt different. Not because our lives had become easier. Not because all challenges had disappeared. Because I finally understood what I had been searching for. The search for home had never been about geography. It had never been about circumstances. It had always been about belonging. And that understanding would soon lead to the final lesson of this journey. A lesson that emerged during one ordinary morning when I looked around my home and realized something extraordinary had happened. The feeling I had been searching for was no longer missing. It was finally there. What happened next would become the conclusion of a journey that began with a simple question and ended with a completely different understanding of what home truly means. I finally felt at home. The moment I had been searching for did not arrive with fireworks. There was no dramatic music playing in the background. Nobody delivered a powerful speech. No life-changing event appeared on the calendar. In fact, if you had watched that morning unfold, you probably would have considered it completely ordinary. Yet sometimes the most important moments in life are the ones that look the least important at first. The morning began like countless others. Sunlight entered through the kitchen window. Coffee brewed quietly. The neighborhood slowly came to life. Cars passed by. Dogs barked in the distance. Someone nearby started mowing the lawn. It was a normal American morning. Nothing unusual. Yet something felt different. As I sat at the kitchen table, I noticed a feeling that had been missing for a very long time. There was no tension in my mind. No restless search for answers. No lingering sense that something important was absent. Instead, there was a feeling of calm. A feeling of gratitude. A feeling of belonging. And suddenly, without warning, I realized something extraordinary. I finally felt at home. The realization was so simple that I almost laughed. After months of questioning, reflecting, observing, and learning, the answer had arrived quietly. Home was never the house. Home was never the neighborhood. Home was never the furniture, the mortgage, the routines, or the appearance of a successful life. Home was the feeling created when people genuinely cared for one another. Home was built through attention. Through trust. Through conversations. Through shared experiences. Through countless ordinary moments that seemed insignificant while they were happening. Looking back, I could see the entire journey differently. The question from my child at the dinner table. The conversations with my wife. The family stories. The photograph that revealed so much. The rainy Saturday. The discussions about belonging. None of those moments alone provided the answer. Together, they revealed it. The answer had been growing slowly all along. Like many important things in life, it developed through small changes repeated consistently over time. Researchers often describe happiness as something people misunderstand. Many individuals believe happiness arrives after achieving a major goal. After earning more money. After buying something new. After reaching a specific milestone. Yet study after study suggests a different reality. Long-term well-being is often shaped by relationships, purpose, gratitude, and connection. The things that matter most are frequently the things that cannot be measured easily. Sitting there that morning, I thought about how many people might be asking the same question I had asked myself. Maybe not using the word home. Maybe using different words entirely. Meaning. Belonging. Purpose. Happiness. Connection. Yet underneath those questions, the search often feels similar. Human beings want to know they matter. They want to know they belong somewhere. They want to know they are not facing life alone. That realization made me think differently about modern life in America. We live in a culture that celebrates achievement, ambition, growth, productivity. Those things have value. They absolutely do. But they are not substitutes for connection. A successful life can still feel lonely. A beautiful house can still feel empty. A busy schedule can still leave people emotionally disconnected. Understanding this truth changed how I viewed my daily choices. Suddenly, small moments felt more important. Listening carefully during conversations. Sharing meals without distractions. Asking meaningful questions. Protecting family time. Expressing gratitude. These actions seemed simple. Yet they quietly strengthened the feeling of home. One of the most surprising lessons from this journey was discovering that belonging does not require perfection. Families do not need perfect communication, perfect schedules, perfect relationships. They need consistency, effort, attention, grace. They need people willing to show up for one another even during imperfect days. Perhaps that is why the feeling of home became stronger once I stopped searching for perfection. The moment I accepted that ordinary moments were enough, those moments became more meaningful. The moment I stopped chasing some ideal future version of life, I became more capable of appreciating the life already unfolding around me. That lesson may be one of the most valuable things I have learned. Because modern culture constantly encourages us to look ahead. The next goal. The next project. The next improvement. Yet some of life's greatest treasures exist in the present moment. They exist in conversations happening right now. Relationships happening right now. Opportunities to connect happening right now. Toward the end of that day, I found myself sitting outside watching the sunset. The sky glowed with shades of orange and gold. Families walked through the neighborhood. Children rode bicycles. Ordinary life continued exactly as it always had. Yet everything seemed different because I was seeing it differently. For the first time in a long while, I was not asking where home was. I already knew. Home was here. Not because this place was perfect. Not because life was easy. Not because every problem had disappeared. Home was here because love was here. Connection was here. Belonging was here. And perhaps that is the real answer to the question that started this entire story. What does home mean to you? Maybe home is not where you live. Maybe home is where you are accepted. Maybe home is where people notice when you are struggling. Maybe home is where laughter feels natural. Maybe home is where you can be fully yourself without fear. Maybe home is simply the place where your heart no longer feels the need to keep searching. If you remember only one thing from this story, let it be this. The feeling of home is rarely found in extraordinary moments. It is built through ordinary moments shared with people who matter. And sometimes the life you have been searching for is already quietly waiting for you inside the moments you almost overlooked. Before you leave, I want to ask you one final question. What if the thing you've been searching for isn't waiting somewhere in the future? What if it has been quietly sitting beside you all along? Maybe home is not a destination. Maybe it is not a perfect relationship, a bigger house, a better job, or a life without problems. Maybe home is found in the people who stay. The people who listen. The people who know your flaws and choose to love you anyway. As you finish this story, take a moment and think about your own life. Who makes you feel at home? When was the last time you sat with someone you love and gave them your full attention? And perhaps the most important question of all. If someone asked you today, where do you feel most at home? What would your answer be? The truth is, many people spend years chasing happiness while accidentally walking past the moments that create it. A shared meal. A simple conversation. A quiet evening. A laugh that arrives when nobody expects it. Those moments rarely look important while they are happening. But one day, they become the memories you never want to lose. And maybe that's why this story matters. Because in a world that constantly tells us to hurry, achieve more, buy more, and become more, sometimes the bravest thing we can do is slow down long enough to notice what already matters. If this story touched your heart, helped your English listening skills, or reminded you of someone special, please leave a comment below and share your answer to this question. What does home mean to you? I read your comments, and your story may inspire someone else who needs it today. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next slow English reading story. Because in the next story, I'll share another deeply personal journey about love, family, life in America, and a surprising lesson that completely changed the way I see happiness. And trust me, the next story begins with a decision that seemed small at the time, but it changed everything. Until next time, keep practicing your English, keep believing in yourself, and remember, sometimes the place you've been trying to find is already holding a seat for you. See you in the next story.